Collective Awakening podcast,
sharing truth and knowledge in this time of conscious awakening
with Chris and Stephen. Hello friends, and welcome to the Collective Awakening podcast. Chris and Stephen here. Thank you so much for being with us, and it's absolute pleasure to welcome our guest for this episode, Andrew Rowe. He is a spiritual healer and self-worth coach as well, so really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Andrew, to the Collective Awakening podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. So just as we get started, it'd be great to not only hear about your journey, what's brought you to the work you're doing now, the twists and turns on this sort of magical ride that we're on here on the earth, but also a little bit of what you sort of offer in your work as well. It'd be great to hear about that.
Sure. I mean, that is a broad question. So where do I get started? Let's talk about like how I became who I am today. Like, because whenever people ask me, what do you do? I just came back from a wedding. I was in Antigua, which was amazing. I'm very blessed and grateful I was there for my best friend's wedding. And people ask you the question, so what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a spiritual healer. And they're like, and they start laughing. They're like, "Oh yeah, whatever. What do you actually do?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a spiritual healer." And then they like lean in. They're like, "Wait, what?" And it is left field, right? It's not something, especially when you look at me and people think immediately like I'm an architect or I'm a lawyer or whatever, and maybe my face doesn't match the normal look. And the goal was never to be a spiritual healer. I mean, I never thought that's what I was going to be. I've always had this dream of being on stage. I have been an actor from a very young age. I love singing, love performing, and that was my dream. That was the end goal. And I went to university. I did creative writing and drama. I had an agent. I did lots of castings and all that kind of stuff. So really, my trajectory was always performance. But at the same time, I was going through my own kind of revelations within myself. Okay, so first, obviously, as a gay man growing up, there was all this like kind of internalized shame, like not feeling comfortable in my own skin, just not knowing who I am, needing to wear masks, which so many gay men can relate to, just being someone that you're not who you are in order to fit in. And as I started to learn who I was when I went to university and was like, oh, wait, no, I'm not bisexual. I am actually gay. We all go through that stage at some point. I realized, okay, well, I still feel like something's missing within me. And so the way I dealt with it was with drugs. I started to do a lot of ketamine, and ketamine was my go-to drug. I reckon ketamine was my go-to drug. If no one knows what ketamine is, it's a horse tranquilizer, sexy. I think it was for me my gateway drug because it just like numbed me, right? It made you like just not have to experience life, all of the trauma, all of the pain that you experience. It just made you feel numb. And so I was doing a lot of it, became a bit addicted to it. Not for a long period of time, just 3 months, but doing it every day. And it started to really impact my mental state. And I didn't realize that I was very open. And so I started opening myself up to like loads of things. And I started to see and feel and experience, different dimensions, different frequencies and all this kind of stuff. But I had zero stability. I had no groundedness. I grew up as a Catholic. Like for me, like none of it made sense. And so as I continued my journey with the drugs, what happened was I started to question my own goodness. Like maybe darker entities came in, or maybe it was just my own internalized hate that was being reflected back at me. Who knows? But I started to go into these dark places where I started to think like, my thoughts were hurting people, or I was killing angels, or all this kind of stuff was going on. And I started to really lose myself. And I started to believe that I was bad, or I was being convinced that I was bad through my thoughts. And then obviously that was then being mirrored back in my reality, because we live in a mirrored world. So certain situations were happening, certain experiences, and also just my dream state started to take on that as well, right? I started to dream that I was being pulled out of heaven and stuck in hell, and it was all very, very dogmatic because of the way I was brought up. It was all very contrast. There was no gray, right? It was either you were good or you were bad, and there was no in between. And that was really the catalyst for me of change, because I was at a place where I was going to take I was just like, I could not deal with the thoughts anymore. It just became like paranoia, and I couldn't make eye contact with people. I just was constantly overthinking everything. And so I had this moment of clarity, was like, no, actually I am light, and I'm going to remember that I'm light, because I'm not going to allow myself to be pulled into whatever this is. And it was the journey that brought me into where I am now. I went into yoga, and then like I did card reading and all this kind of stuff. And I just started to be more and more identified with it, more and more connected with it. And long story short, I kind of started to do like spiritual practices and stuff, started to do something called theta healing. That was kind of my gateway of into spirituality. And people said you were really good. I was really good at it. And then I set up my business, and it did incredibly well. I had 150 clients within 3 months. And basically, I guess, from me going from what I would say is my own personal hell into my own personal heaven, like walking through like the total darkness back into light, it gave me the tools and the abilities to guide other people to do the same. So, I'm able to like read people's frequency. I can feel people's energy. I can really feel what's blocking them. I understand trauma very well, and I know how to transmute trauma back into light, and I understand patterns. So I can see, when one thing is happening, where that's coming from, because of my own journey and my own experience. So, although it was a really challenging part of my timeline, and at the time, for 7 years, I regretted every moment doing those drugs. Now, in hindsight, I'm like, I would never have changed anything, because I am literally the person I am today, thanks to what I experienced in the past. So I guess that's like a really condensed version of how I became the spiritual healer. But we all have something that usually it's like a dark night of the soul, we like to call it. As humans, we want to try and identify with it. But I think it's we have to lose ourselves in order to remember ourselves. And I think that happens to all of us in some way. And for me, that was, I lost myself completely, and I was able to just remember my truth without all of the noise of my conditioning.
Yeah, and it's you took the words right out of my mouth, actually, with losing yourself to find yourself again. And it's so many of us have experienced that, particularly those who are involved in any sort of spirituality or healing arts. It almost seems like a rite of passage, that part of our experience that's essential, so we're able to understand and hold for other people in the future, and understand what they're going through as well. And something me and Stephen talked about lately, having the trust that we know they're going to come out the other side, because we have. And I think that's really important as well. Interesting that you mentioned about the creativity as well, because I find that lends itself to a lot of people who are involved in any sort of, I mean, we could call it like light work, healing arts, anything like that. They tend to be very, very creative people. I actually work with, I used to do sound and lights for a show at one time. And I used to find a lot of the performers were always interested in some form in spirituality in some way. So it's like this openness with that creativity that really lends itself to that. But so it's really interesting, that journey. So as we look at the world now, and I was considering this podcast, and obviously I've connected with you through your TikTok posts and Instagram, and this lack of self-worth, which we are seeing. I meet a lot of people, and I've experienced it myself. And why do you feel so many of us feeling that lack of self-worth, or that's something that is holding us back from achieving what we want in life, or a true happiness?
I think that it is probably because it's the contrast that we're meant to be experiencing. So I feel like if we all just came to this reality feeling full of worth and goodness and like feeling amazing, then we wouldn't be experiencing the contrast, right?
Yeah.
We would already know what that feels like. So I feel like there's definitely a sensation of us needing to experience this lack of self-worth, this disconnect. That's what it essentially is. I feel like when you're not feeling worthy, not good enough, and all that kind of stuff, from a spiritual perspective, it's just a disconnect from your true nature. And so that's what we've come here to experience. We've come here to experience the disconnect of our true nature, to reconnect with it, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like that is one of the main reasons why we all have that in common, because that is what we've come here to fully embody and experience. Now, of course, it's also a product of our conditioning. You know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, if we have had if our parents haven't experienced self-worth and goodness, they're not going to be able to teach that to us, right? So they're going to then
Yeah.
just project that onto us. So then we're going to start to take on board what they're holding on to. So I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing. I think it's just a natural thing that we all need to find within ourselves. I think it's okay. They're explaining it to me now. If we were to come here feeling already worthy and good enough, well, what's the point of this human experience, right?
Yeah.
Actually, the journey is the most important point. So if we come here forgetting that we're worthy and good enough, forgetting that we're whole and complete, forgetting that we're connected to the divine, we go onto this journey of remembering it. And if we remember it, it's then an embodied experience. And then it's something that's truer and it becomes more real to us. If we're just born with it, it's not something that we can really feel or experience. So I think that's probably why we see this pattern in everyone. I mean, every single client I've ever worked with has this pattern. So I think that's probably why that happens.
Yeah, that's I really love where this sort of is taking us at the moment, because I think that's so important as we're talking about it, because it lends itself to not have any regrets as well.
Mm,
Everything happens for a reason, and I think a lot of people can get stuck in that regret, the coulda, woulda, shoulda. That's what I call it. And also I'm 100% with you on that. That I think there's a book I read many years ago, and it said we know the power of unconditional love when we're in the spirit world, and we come back. Part of our journey is to learn the power of it here in our earth experience. And how do we do that? Through great adversity, inside and outside. And that's how we recognize how powerful it is, and how we come through the other end. So yeah,
absolutely.
I
I
completely agree with that.
I think I just want to touch upon something you said around like regret. And that is just such a human thing, because it's this feeling of like, "Oh, I should have known better. I should have done it differently." And it's like, bitch, if you knew better, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. Like, let's
Yeah.
be honest. Let's be logical here. But the human wants to be perfect. The human feels like perfection is the thing that we have to always achieve. But actually, the thing is, when we regret something, we're just resisting the flow of life. And the more we regret, the more we resist, the more we experience that resistance in our our everyday experience. So I feel like whenever regret shows up, we need to just ease in and surrender and be like, how is it serving me? Like, how is it serving me to regret this? Like, I can't turn back time. There's no way you can turn back time. If you figure out how to turn back time, tell me. But like at the moment, it's not something that we can do. So we just have to be in acceptance, an acceptance of all of the pieces of the puzzle, and not go so micro scale, but go macro, being like, actually, you know what? I needed to have this experience. Like for me, I needed to do loads of ketamine. I needed to do all that in order to be where I am today. Who knows, if I didn't do that, where would I be? Maybe I would have gone down a completely different route and I wouldn't have helped so many people change their lives. So I think if we can start to see more things from a bigger picture, then things become a lot easier.
Yeah, and they almost slot into place.
I just want to, something that came to me, because I'm doing a lot of writing at the moment, and it was what you were saying there was actually something that I've just completed yesterday on a couple of pieces about living in the dualistic world. You know, we've come back that again, the word acceptance is accepting that the good, there is no good or bad. Every experience nourishes the soul and it helps us to grow. But there is, talking about the lack of self-worth, what I've come to understand that it was maybe part of that matrix, part of that conditioning that we believe that to feel worthy, that we are sort of pursuing this illusion of external happiness, and so we're searching for this happiness, and you know, it's this carrot and the stick, this cycle that our grandparents, our parents keep working. We're going to be happy, we're going to be earning, and really I've come to learn, actually, and it might be very controversial to say this, that I don't think happiness is our natural state. I think it's present. I think it's inner peace. Because when we're happy, you know, we'll go shopping. Oh, I feel great. Happiness is not a stable emotion. It's just the opposite of anger, or the opposite in this dualistic world. So I think at the very core, I feel that it's actually inner peace. The presence, being at one in that journey, is our natural state. Happiness isn't our natural state, if that makes sense
Yeah, I mean, if you look at David Hawkins' scale, you have enlightenment, which is at the top of the scale, and just below enlightenment is peace, and then just below peace is joy. So I feel like, you know, our state, the reason joy and love feels so good is because it is naturally more linked to who we truly are, right? In opposed to like anger, shame, you know, sadness. The reasons they feel so heavy is because they're the antithesis of who we are normally. I definitely agree with you that like having inner peace and being able to be at peace with everything is for sure our natural state, absolutely. And I think enlightenment, if we were to take it one further step from peace, which is this sense of like I amness in everything, or total connection to everything, then it's bliss, right? But to be in a state of bliss all the time, that means that you have to be completely accepting of whatever life gives you. You have to be completely accepting of yourself, of other people. Like that is, you know, next level. Let's, you know, it's harder to reach that state. But I do completely agree with you, Stephen. I think there is definitely something to be said around not, you know, we can fall into the trap of reaching for joy, and then like you know, searching for joy all the time, and then allowing that to then start to be our new addiction. So it's finding the balance, because a life that's just peaceful is great, but there's joy is also an amazing emotion to experience as well. And so the danger of just experiencing peace is we can fall into apathy. We can fall into this thing of like, oh, nothing bothers me, oh, everything's okay, but then actually you're just spiritual bypassing. So it's fine. You have to be super aware and connected to yourself if you're in the energy of peace, because you need to know, am I spiritually bypassing my actual emotions in this moment?
I think as well, just going back to the point you made earlier on, that, and it's something that I accepted very earlier on, and it moved me away from acting the victim, and learning that actually all my experiences, even the abuse as being a young boy through my parents and with my brothers and sisters, that actually I can now accept, again, that word acceptance, that I'm not the victim, that all those experiences as being my initiation in gaining, for me, maybe the empathy, the compassion that I've needed to awaken my gifts in my healing journey, that I can then be that container for other people. And that's and again, we talk about bypassing. I think there is a lot of healers that have gone into the healing arts as a way to bypass actually the other part of the shadow side that's not really been healed, which a lot of people don't sort of really talk about. But I want to ask you a question, and it's probably a question on philosophy, really, because it really ties into a lot of stuff we've talked about already. Do you think then I believe in reincarnation, and I feel that we reincarnate for a purpose, for a reason too. So do you think as the human soul, we need to suffer in order to become enlightened? Do you think the suffering is an integral part of that awakening, of the unfoldment of the inner lotus on the consciousness?
No, I think that suffering is a human perspective of understanding of an experience. So the human will see it as suffering because it causes pain, but I don't think that suffering is a choice. You know, it's either a conscious choice or it's an unconscious choice, but it's a choice all the same. You're still choosing to suffer in that moment. You're choosing to give an experience meaning. Now, of course, you know, when you're a child and if you're being abused, it's going to cause you suffering because you don't have the cognitive ability to understand otherwise. You know, but even as an adult, if someone, you know, hurts you or says something kindly, you can still see it as suffering. It depends at what level of consciousness you have and how much healing that you've done on yourself. I think the idea of like suffering in order to evolve is a very kind of religious programming. I think it does not have to be the case. I think we go through experiences that can be challenging, you know, like it's like growing pains, but you know, growing pains doesn't have to be suffering. It's just part of your life. Your bones are going to grow, your teeth are going to grow. It's going to be painful, but it's also a part of our human experience. I think if we look at it from the perspective of the soul and the soul's evolution, you know, every soul has something that it's trying to achieve or accomplish. And I think if you see it from a higher perspective, it's just to come back to the totality that we are one. But if you see it from a more micro perspective, your soul has also come here to experience certain things. So you have, you know, maybe through the abuse, you have learned forgiveness. And that was something that was really important for you to learn in this lifetime. You know, maybe someone who has been betrayed and who's been cheated on many times, their thing is to learn to let go of attachment and not to attach all our emotions and feelings to one experience or one thing. You know, we all have our little things that we're trying to learn and overcome. And it feels painful because we don't have the spiritual knowledge and understanding. Like if we knew, like if we sat down with our soul and our soul was like, bitch, you're gonna go through this, like you are gonna go through, you're gonna come out and your mom's gonna reject you and it's gonna really hurt, but don't worry because she still loves you, and later on down the line you're gonna become best friends. Like if you knew the whole roadmap, you'd be like, sweet, like I'm good, like let's do this. But that also takes away from the beauty of life, right? And all of the and the whole experience of life. So yeah, I think suffering is a choice.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We had in one of our groups last week here at the Purple Mountain a bit of a discussion on reincarnation, and it was interesting the questions that came up. And I feel it is a big thing with, I suppose I would have been through it even at one time, of looking at these occurrences as they happen to us, not from a victim perspective, not like we're being punished or something's going against us. And immediately, even talking about reincarnation, people will instantly ask those questions that come from that perspective. Well, why did this happen? Why did that happen? That was awful. And I feel when we start to switch, and I feel we do that by asking different questions, like why, instead of why has this happened to me? You know, what's it showing me? What have I got to learn from this situation? And I do feel, as you were speaking there, Andrew, and Stephen as well, that it's almost part of the sort of false matrix of things, this perfection thing. This is what you do in life, and you're just going to go along and you're going to have a happy little family and meet a partner and get this perfect house and everything's going to be. And when that doesn't happen for people, they start to fall apart because it isn't reality, really, is it? It's perfection in our imperfections.
Mm. I think there's pressure to try and fit into what society says of you. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more of people moving away from that, right? So people
Yeah.
creating their own businesses, people choosing not to have children because they don't, you know, that they don't feel like it's in alignment, right? There's more taking hold of their own autonomy, and being like, actually, this just feels like it's societal pressure. And yeah, there's definitely is this constant striving for perfection. And I think it's something to be remembered as well, that like you can be spiritual and you can be rich. Like there's nothing wrong with money.
Yeah.
I think one of my main qualms is where people are like, oh yeah, like you have to be spiritual, but you have to go live in a jungle. And like spirituality just means that you're in touch with your true nature, which is love. That's what for me spirituality means, right? It doesn't mean that you have to like, okay, I wear a crystal because I like wearing crystals, but it doesn't mean that you have to have crystals. It doesn't mean that you have to be a vegan. It doesn't mean that you have to, you know, do ayahuasca once a week. Like those are just aspects of spirituality. But for me, spirituality is just living through the eyes of love and experiencing love in everything that you do. And when you have money and you have that kind of mindset, you're going to make a much better and bigger impact in this world than if you're just a poor spiritual person. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I know that sometimes we can get like pulled into this thing of like money, materialism, money's greed, money's the matrix. It's like, no, money is just energy, and money is whatever you want to make it to be. We just have people at the moment who use money as a tool to control people. But again, that's again part of our soul's experience and our soul's journey.
Yeah, I think that's really profound what you've shared there, particularly about money and spirituality as well. And it's a journey I've been on, we've both been on here at the sort of Purple Mountain as well, of this feeling of that you should be a pauper because you're involved in some sort of spirituality, and you find when you're in that mindset that you meet people who might treat you that way as well and undervalue what you're offering. And so it's important to value what you're offering, that know that we are here to enjoy our experience on the earth as well. And in doing that, it only gives us better opportunity to share that with others around us, to be able to facilitate better. Just before the podcasting, we were talking about travel. It gives opportunity to travel, to meet people, to do work in other countries, to connect that way. So I do think that's part of a bit of a false belief system. And even in the spiritual movement, when I first got involved, for many years, I used to think, yeah, I'm going to be like dead zen and nothing's going to bother me and I'll be really passive. And what started to happen is, oh, everybody's walking all over me now. So I need to stand up, and sometimes things do need a bloody good shove and say, no, I'm not having any of this. And you need to hold your boundaries as well. So I think it's about being you, your true essence, and not fitting into some mold that we should be or society expects us to be either.
Absolutely. Setting boundaries and being your authentic self, you know, authenticity isn't about being a doormat, and it's not about just allowing everything. Everyone has their own version of authenticity as well. And like you can have your persona, your personality authenticity. So I'm like very charismatic, I'm camp, I'm silly, whatever. Someone else might not be that, but that's my personality. But my authentic self is what we all have in common, which is we are all love at core. And so we all should be able to learn from our triggers and not be triggered, and not allow ourselves to be pulled into these things. And we will, of course, naturally, it's normal. It's part of our human experience. But my like goal with my clients and stuff is to help them reconnect with that part of them who is all in control of themselves more, right? Not allowing life to start to life them. I think that's the main thing, is like the moment you allow another person to trigger you, it's because you've lost touch with your center and with your truth. So it's also finding that balance of like, what am I here to learn? Like for you, Chris, exactly. It was like, okay, well, maybe, you know, you're quite a calm, more passive person. You need to learn how to set boundaries. You need to know how to do this. Whereas for me, it's like, I'm very good at setting boundaries. So maybe I need to be like more easy and let people, you know,
Yeah,
be a little bit calmer and whatever, right? And we all have our own things. Like we don't have one size fits all. And I think that's the beauty of this experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it sort of takes us back to that point of really coming back and find losing ourselves to finding ourselves again, all part of the journey. And it's been touched on a little bit here already about relationships with families, friendships, our partners, and how does that come in then? Because obviously this can be hugely mirrored in those close to us when we're doing that inner work, when we're going through that journey. And I know you do a lot of that work with people one to one. So how can that sort of play out for us, particularly in partnerships as well? People see that a lot in the relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely something to be said with people rush into a relationship way too soon. And it would be great if they like once you finish university or when you're at university, you have like, spiritual training on how to deal with your triggers and everything, because then you might not attract a partner that you're going to divorce 5 years down the line. Because when you haven't done the healing, you are going to attract a person that's going to mirror your deepest wounds. That's the whole point of this experience. And so that's going to be really challenging and it's going to be really difficult. So, once you've done the healing, once you've done the work on yourself, you then attract a partner that's at a higher state of consciousness and you're going to be vibing at a much nicer level. And so I think, when it comes to relationships, it's always looking at like, what are your triggers? How are you being triggered by this person? What are they evoking within you? Are they making you feel unseen? Are they making you feel rejected? Are they making you feel jealous? Are they making you feel all of these different things? Because they're all just beautiful indicators of what needs to be healed from your inner child's perspective or ancestral or past lives, usually mainly inner child, but then there's obviously some residue from other places as well. And so we can use our relationships, whether that's with a family member, whether that's with a sibling, or whether that's with a romantic partner, as ways of finding deeper understandings of ourselves and how we can heal. Now, a lot of people will automatically put blame on the other person. Yeah, but it's them. They're like this. They're the ones, behaving this way. They're the narcissist. It's like, bitch, if there's a narcissist in your life, you called them in. Like, take responsibility. I've never been with a narcissist in my life ever. So why does someone else have that tendency of attracting narcissists? We have to see it from that perspective of like, if it's not in my reality, why is it in your reality? Because there's something in your frequency that's calling it in. And you have to take notice of that and you have to take responsibility. It's taking radical responsibility of your life, and your relationships are your best mirror to show you where you need to take responsibility.
That's amazing. And there's a lot of that. I think a lot of people are waking up to that now as well, and really understanding what triggers are, because for me, triggers are wonderful opportunities to really look within. And I think, and I feel as I've sort of done that work on myself, sort of learning from reacting and being defensive is, I think, is the first sort of line of that inner awareness. Actually saying, really finding the emotional maturity, not maturity, wisdom, to say, right, I'm stopping here, take a breath. What is this person really saying? Because actually beyond those initial words, there is something that's behind that, that's been triggered in me, that I'm actually mirroring and attracting in that person. So it is a wonderful opportunity. Now, I say that very romantically at the time. It doesn't bloody feel like that. You get so frustrated, but that comes down to, I feel, sort of the inner child, the conditioning we have, how we deal with our own emotions. And I think it's trying to reprogram those aspects of that inner child, and learning, actually, my partner's not really attacking me. My mother's not really being horrible. They are trying to show me something. And I think that's part of the collective, because I think that's a lot of us are trying to learn that, isn't it?
I think it's a balance between taking responsibility and then also knowing when you've done the work and when you know it's someone else's story. So it's this thing of being like, actually, do you know what? Like, I'm anchored in my self-worth. I know that I'm good enough. So this person that's speaking to me this way, that's their story. That's about them. That's got nothing to do with me. It's also looking at like how you're choosing to react to a situation. So like with my client, she received a message from someone that was saying that, you know, she wasn't spending enough time and da 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 da. And normally she would start to feel guilty and she would start to feel, but instead, because she's done the work, she's like, actually, no, this person is just projecting their insecurities onto me, and I'm going to set a boundary and I'm going to say, no, I don't want this in my life anymore. So it's also having that awareness. We live in this really kind of paradoxical universe, you know, like manifesting. To manifest, you need to desire what you want, but you need to let it go at the same time. It's the same thing. Like with your triggers, you need to know when this is about you and when it's not. And it's all coming back to awareness. And the only way you have awareness is knowing thyself. That's why the oracles of Delphi, you know, before they went into the temple, it says, know thyself. That's the biggest thing and the most important thing that we could ever do as humans on this planet, is to know ourselves. But the only way we're going to know ourselves is if we do the deep inner work. And, you know, you can do the therapy, and the therapy will give you like a little glimpse. It'll give you a little glimmer, right? It'll be like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, my dad did this to me. This is why I'm like this. Or, you know, oh yeah, I was left, you know, at primary school when I was 3. So now I have abandonment issues. But where's the solution? It's like you can like the person knows, they are aware of it, but they still react, you know, like a psychopath when that person hasn't texted them back immediately. You know, they still react like this and that. It's because there's not a solution. I feel like that's where spirituality comes in. That's where, you know, people like us come in, where we're more solution focused, where it's like, yeah, you get the whole issue, you know, where the problem is, but actually we need to resolve this. We need to close the loop. And coming back to what you were saying, Stephen, is the reason we react in a certain way is because the loop hasn't been closed. The inner child is still functioning from an open loop, is still thinking that, you know, oh, my mother doesn't love me because she did this when I was 3. Therefore, now as an adult, if she does do this, it reminds me of that experience. And so therefore, I'm going to react in this way. There's also one other thing that I wanted to add on, which is the reminder that we have an addictive behavior to dopamine and adrenaline. And, you know, my client, today, she was saying that she's selling her house, and I said, well, how's it going? She's like, oh, it's really overwhelming. I was like, okay, well, why is it overwhelming? And she stopped herself. She said, actually, no, it's not overwhelming. Actually, it's actually totally fun. I was like, okay, why did you say it's overwhelming? She said, I guess, you know, just have it. I was like, yeah, exactly. Because your system, your nervous system is used to saying it's overwhelming. And then suddenly you're going to have someone be like, oh, I hope you're okay. And suddenly you're being soothed. And that was the way that you received that love and affection. But because we did the work on her inner child and she realized she was then able to have the awareness within herself to be like, wait, shit, that's not me. That's my old version of self. And that's just the part of me that's addicted to that experience, that's addicted to the anger, that's addicted to the sadness, that's addicted to being the victim. And so it's also finding that balance as well.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of something that I've become aware of a couple of years ago, and I'm still very aware of doing things to make me feel better, not to make them feel better, as part of a childhood trauma there, and stopping and actually, do I really want to do this? Who am I doing this for? Am I doing it for them, or am I really doing it for me? But it's again reprogramming. That's been the most important part of my journey, is learning to stop. And the focus on curiosity for me has been so, and I feel really emotional even talking about it, is going back to that being curious, stopping and asking those questions, being curious instead of battle, reaction, defense, stopping and really being curious. And I think if anything, I'm sort of very focused on the meditation side. A huge passion of my meditation is, you know, drawing your awareness within you and asking those questions internally, bringing back that sense of curiosity. I feel, Andrew, I think that's really important. But I just wanted to ask you about, you know, something that me and Chris have, I wouldn't say sadly faced. I think that maybe it's coming from my ego, but when you're dealing or working with clients, how do you navigate through people that generally want to be healed or want to heal themselves, and those that don't want to shift? Because there has to be a willingness and intention behind self-healing. How do you navigate through that, Andrew, as a facilitator, as somebody that works in the healing arts?
Yeah, I think quite simply, I only attract those who are ready to do the work. I think that's the thing, is like I am very, very clear with who I'm going to work with. My time is precious. You know, I have a level of expertise, and if you're not ready to do the work, you're not going to work with me. You're going to find a reason or excuse. And, you know, like if I go on a call with someone, I always want to feel their energy. And if I can sense that they're not ready, then I say, I feel like you're not ready. I feel like this isn't the right thing for you. It's also finding like different, you know, tiers. Like I have a membership, which is, you know, a lot like lower cost. So it's a lot simpler for someone to invest and feel less scared to dive into it. But when it comes to someone's like healing journey, everyone is on a different path, right? And so someone who is still not ready to do the work, they might be ready to do the work in like 2 years' time. It's about just trusting that they know, their soul knows what's best for them.
Yeah.
And we're not here to change them. You know, we're not here to try and influence them in any way. We're just here to provide that kind of space for whoever is ready to take the plunge.
Do you think as well, Andrew, that and it's something that I've come to realize is when you sit there and you're talking to clients, sometimes people can entrap themselves in the story, in the drama and the story. And sometimes we need to just hang on, take a deep breath here. You're telling me all about your life. How are you actually bringing back that curiosity? Because I think sometimes, and I fell into this trap many times, is that sometimes all we do is we talk about problems and we get ourselves so het up into that story, in the drama of ourselves and others, and actually stop 1 minute, take a deep breath. I've had to say that, right? Take a deep breath, look. And actually when you strip away the drama, strip away, where is the solution? I think we are living in this time now, right? And this is why I think so many people fall into the conspiracy. And we know the darkness is there. We know it's all there. But if that's all we're going to see and all we're ever going to talk about, the problems and the darkness, that's all you're ever going to see. There has to be that balance between, right, we know it's there. We know the darkness is there. We know the shadow's there. Let's find a solution. And I think that is something really, as facilitators, we've got to really ground up. How have you navigated through that?
Yeah, I think I call them red herrings, basically. So like, you know, I might be speaking to someone and then they take me on this whole fucking journey and talking about this whole thing about their father and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're completely avoiding the question here. And actually, my job as the facilitator, as the healer, is to know when we're going off topic and to tune into their energy and be like, okay, you know what? I know this is just, we're going round and round in circles. You're avoiding the truth of the matter here, which is X, Y, and Z. And I think that is maybe the sign of a good facilitator is being able to listen and know exactly like how to guide your client back to the truth and not get stuck in the story. I don't give a shit about the story. Like everything's a story, like whatever, you know, and it's not coming from a place of lack of empathy, because I am a very compassionate, empathetic person, but I see it as a story. And the more involved you are in the story, the more involved you are in the lack of truth, the illusion of reality.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I may have a client who like keeps talking about like how unfair it is, like she should have known better, and I'm like, this is just a story you keep telling yourself. And I said, you can keep telling yourself this story and life is going to keep getting hard, or you can just decide to stop saying that it's unfair and to just take acknowledgement that your soul literally came here to experience this. You know, like if you look at gene keys and all that kind of stuff, like it's very interesting. I've been diving a bit deeper into that and looking at our blueprint, and everyone has their blueprint. So yeah, I'd say that that's how I do it.
It's basically you. I think, Andrew, you probably will agree with this. You know, when you're holding that, like when you're holding that container, you're not working with distortions. I say that when we do deeper ceremonial work. I mean, Chris is very passionate with this as well. I might agree that, you know, we're not here to work with people's distortions. We're not here to work with people's stories. We are working with truth. And sometimes being truthful, sometimes I think it's an important part of our lessons as facilitators. Is really, I think subconsciously they expect us or need us to say no, to say, actually, we're working with truth here. And some people are like, wow, they're not thankful at the time, but, you know, I've had friends that come to see me months later. Thank you for being truthful to me. I didn't want to hear that. It made me feel so bloody uncomfortable. I've been there thinking, oh my God, he's working with my energies here. This is making me feel so uncomfortable. But you feel so grateful after that they're able to be that truthful, because that's been part of my healing, to actually force me to look within myself. And, you know, I say to people, go to those uncomfortable places, feel that uncomfortable energy, because that's where the healing's needed. You know, people talk about, oh, I want to work with the light. And it's something that I feel very passionate about. You know, to understand what light is, you have to, because like you said, you know, we live in a dualistic world. You want to know what light is, you got to know what pain is. It's part of that earthly human experience.
Totally. Yeah, completely agree with you.
So, Chris, what do you want?
Yeah. Well, good. I'm just sat just enjoying listening, really. But as you were both speaking, I feel it really touches on a subject as a facilitator or even in life. Particularly, Andrew, when you were talking about when people are ready to receive information or not, and it's actually something I find can be very toxic, and that's what I'd call rescuing, where we step in when somebody isn't ready, when we assume what's right for somebody else. And actually, in doing that, I feel we interfere with a path. We put them back a step. I got shown from spirit almost like taking a needle off a record, and then they've got to go back to the beginning of the song all over again. So that's an important boundary to uphold as well. What's your feelings on that?
Yeah, I think I think there's two ways of seeing it. So I think the first way is, I always, if I have advice, or if I you know, feel like I hold the keys to their problem, I always just say, are you willing to listen? Like, are you open to hearing some advice? Because then if they say yes, then I know that it's going to go into their brain. Because if I just say to them what they need to do, they're not going to listen to it. And anyway, they're just going to move on with their lives. So if the person is ready to listen to some guidance and support, then great. You know, like, they're ready, they're perfect. You know, but if they're not, then yes, obviously, if you just tell them what to do, or you're like, oh, you start to be a preacher, and you start to be this person who's, you know, like a guru sitting on their little high and mighty kind of platform, and I'm better than you, and I know all of the answers. However, what I do want to share is this other thing, which is basically, and this is kind of coming more from a perspective of reality creation and consciousness, which is, we can mold and change people as well in relation to our perspective of them. So what I mean by that is, everything that you're experiencing right now is perception. It's, you know, I am a reflection of your perception of what your thoughts and beliefs are of me. If I did something to you, unkind to you, Chris, you would be looking at me and being like, yeah, he's talking all this, but actually he's an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, you will have a preconceived idea of who I am.
Yeah.
And I think that's all our relationships are. So, you know, our relationship with our mother is dependent on how we perceive them from our past, from their experiences and everything. And so a client of mine who had a very tenuous relationship with his mother, because she was very controlling, she was very anti-gay, all of the things, and he had a lot of difficulties with her. Always said to me, you know, she never listens to me, she's so arrogant, she's narcissistic, she's all these things. And I was like, okay, fine. So then we did a lot of work around the mother wound and healing those parts and all this kind of stuff, but he was still saying the same rhetoric. And I said, okay, I said, you know what, let's call him Patrick. I said, hey Patrick, why don't we, as a game for the next week, you're just going to envision your mother through the eyes of love. You're going to see her like being super kind to you, super supportive, super loving, you know, super kind, and all those kind of things. And you're just going to do it. You're not going to tell her. You're just going to do it in your mind, and you're just going to keep on visualizing it. And so he did it for a week. And because he had no resistance to the visualization in the first place, because he'd done all the healing, so he could get his subconscious could get on board with it, magic happened. Like, he messaged me saying, I just had the best conversation with my mom. She was so supportive. She was so loving. She was so kind. And then now they have an incredible relationship with each other. And of course, they would have never reached that. Like, you can't just visualize someone and change someone. You have to have done all the healing work around that person in the first place to release the resistance. And so then I started thinking to myself, well, are we taking away the growth and healing of that person? And actually, no, we're not, because what we're doing is we are changing our perception of them, and through our energy, it's like we're healing them through our energy, through our perception, through our energy, we're healing them. So then they start to change, because we're all interconnected because of oneness. And so then they start to change, and so then that starts to snowball as well. So I think it's like realizing that we have a lot of power to change other people. Again, it depends on how much the desire is there to change that person, and also how much resistance we have around that person in order to change them. So it's like, it comes twofold, right? It's like, yes, we should let someone do their thing and evolve and grow on their own. However, we also have the power to help speed that up if we wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd really agree with that. And I think you put it really well, because I feel it is a very, very fine line to toe. It really is. And it's so easy to step either side too much. And I think really how we deal with that is our own awareness, our own inner awareness that we've spoke about already. But we've put together so many building blocks of our journey in this conversation already. But what I'd like to come to is techniques. So as you're working with clients, either one-to-one or in groups, what sort of techniques would you say would be go-to techniques to assist in really everything that we've talked about in the podcast so far?
So like, what would I suggest someone does on their own, or what do I do with my clients?
Um, uh, Both really, but what they do on their own. So what they can sort of take home and put into practice in their daily
Yeah.
lives.
So I would always say, like, and this was what people asked at the wedding as well. They're like, if you had one thing to share, what would it be? I'd say just notice what triggers you. That's the main thing. I would say, like,
Yeah.
if you are being triggered, it means that it's the absence of love, which means that there's something that's looking to be healed. So rather than start to, be the experiencer, start to be the observer of your experience. And the best way is to look at, like, okay, so, in this moment, I felt really triggered. And rather than being like, I'm going to pull myself into this trigger and I'm going to like go on the journey, like Stephen said, you're going to stop and you're just going to ask yourself, why did this trigger me so much? Like, what did this evoke within me? Sometimes I get, my clients to go into their body and say, okay, well, where do I feel that in my body? Maybe I feel it in my solar plexus. And then, like, when I work with my clients, it's like looking at what the emotion is there and really understanding the emotion. So it's like, oh, it's anger. Great. So, you're feeling triggered because you have anger linked to this situation. And then when you're working on your own, you can start to like journal through it, or you can start to, do your own practice around that. Obviously, when it's like quite deep core wounds, it's a bit harder to do that. That's why people like us exist, right? That we just make things go a lot quicker and we can just speed the healing up. But if you were to just literally just do it on your own, then that's what I would suggest you do. You start to just meditate, because meditation creates peace in the mind and allows you to start to have more awareness and you're disidentify yourself from the experience. and then start to notice how life is reflecting back your own inner dialogue, and what is your inner dialogue by what life is reflecting back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind as well there is sort of our roles, as you spoke about, as we're all talking here. And something, as I do one-to-one readings, that I've come to feel over the years is that I see them as a spark. And it's like it sparks people, it sparks something in the light. And I actually find quite often a lot of reading or connection with somebody can be a lot of it can be confirmation for things they know already deep down. But just by hearing it and it being channeled in some form from somebody else, it can give them that spark. And then off they go out into the world. Right. I now have it concrete what I need to do. I kind of knew it already, but I had to touch base with someone. And that has assisted me in really, launching me in the direction I want to go in. So I suppose that is the role we can all play. And I know you do some readings as well, because actually where I first connected with you was a TikTok live, and you give me a card reading. It was like really random, and it was absolutely spot on as well. But I'm finding through more, like we've been doing one-to-one readings, myself and Stephen, for many years. And I'm actually finding, particularly in the last 4 to 5 years, maybe, that within the reading, talking of people's patterns and loops and what seems to be brought into the reading more and more. So it's very much, I feel, what is needed in the moment right now. Is that
Yeah.
something you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I rarely do readings. I just do them on TikTok for fun because I quite enjoy
Yeah.
them, and I quite like reading people's. I try and not use cards, so I try and just read people's frequency and just listen to what they're saying. But yeah, I definitely think that the cards will show you exactly what needs to be healed. Obviously, it depends what kind of reading you're doing, right? But I think
Yeah.
for me, I don't do readings where I tell people like what their future is, or am I meant to be with this person? Like, I don't give a shit about that. I give about like what's blocking you, what's preventing you
Yeah.
from stepping into your highest timeline. Let's look at like actionable steps. And, I guess maybe that's kind of what you're experiencing also because of a change in energy within you. So then like the cards that are going to come out are going to be more in alignment to that rather than in alignment to kind of what I call basic bitch reading, which is just like people who just want confirmation for things that are just completely pointless.
Well, absolutely. I think in my entire sort of time of doing this work, the most asked question that I used to get, and it used to really trigger me, I suppose, was, am I going to meet the man or woman of my dreams? Am I going to meet my perfect partner? And even many years ago, even about 8 years ago, and I didn't always understand it, but what I felt and what I would say was, it comes from inside you. Don't look outwardly, look inwardly, look to change within you and attract a different
Be
frequency, and
careful what
things
you
will
wish for,
change.
Chris, as well. I say that to my client. And this client of mine, she went, "Oh, I've got my partner, but I don't like him now." I said, "Why? You've wished for him now. You didn't want to do that healing on yourself." And it's sometimes you have to be so brutally honest in readings to say it's not them, it's not your fourth husband or your sixth wife, it's you. You're the one who's keep choosing them. No, it's not. It's them. And sometimes the hardest thing that I've had to learn over the past year is actually saying no, you can't see me again. It's because it's something that it's almost like, I don't know if I can use those words, spiritual abuse is the abuse of my own gift to keep going back to that same frequency. To actually, my lesson is to say, no, I'm not the right person to read for you because you're stuck. There's an unwillingness. We talked about that earlier on, didn't we? That unwillingness. I said, there's nothing more I can say. Spirit, I keep giving you that. Why, you told me that message last year. I said, that's down to you. We did a mind, body, and spirit event, Chris. Do you remember? And this lady came to see me, and she's all flustered. And I gave her this reading. She went, I'm not happy. I said, why are you not happy? She went, I've just seen 8 other mediums in here. I've went to every medium. They've all told me the same. And I went, well, I think you should start listening to spirit here. And she was so flustered and annoyed, Andrew. And it just made me chuckle, you know, spiritsy everything.
I think, you know, there's this thing around what the reason I kind of got big on TikTok was I did a lot of things around SP, which is specific person and all this kind of stuff. And like you can manifest your SP and stuff. And I was doing like videos around that. And then I just saw like the desperation that was coming from, and like these people who are like, why did my SP not come back? Like, no, like I want my SP. And then I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to stop doing this stuff because it's making me feel really grossed out. And I was just like, you don't want your SP back. Like once you've done the healing, once you've done the work, you know, the whole point of getting into the manifesting arena is actually healing, self-healing. The reason we do it is because we then can heal ourselves, and then we're in higher frequency, and then we start to attract new things and better things. And so people who are like, oh, I want my SP back. And you're like, okay, yeah, but you need to let go of them. You need to not focus on them. You need to just focus on yourself. You need self-love, all this kind of stuff. And then your SP will come back. But I'm like 9 times out of 10, you're not going to want them back. And people just don't want that. They're just like, no, I just want them back. It's like, okay, that's your journey. You know, you want them back. Keep stuck, keep being where you're at. It's up to you. But those who do the work and who then they're just like, oh God, no, he's gross. Like, why was I even thinking of, you know, because they suddenly see the light and they're like, wait, this person treated me like shit. Like anyone who says to me, like, I really want to be back with this guy. He's been ghosting me, but I love him. And I'm like, why do you want to be back with someone who's ghosting you? Ghosting has literally been like diagnosed as abuse. Like it is a form of abuse. Why would you want to be with someone who's abusing you? Do you know what I mean? Like it's just it's mad. I'm like, you need to realize that there's a part of you that is calling this in and that enjoys this on some level, and it's a lack of self-worth. And unless you do something about it, you're going to keep repeating those patterns, like that woman who obviously didn't get that message after the 8th reading. So yeah,
I've watched it. Really interesting. I don't know what you take on the manifesting side. My take on it, and I realized this through a ceremony I did a long time ago, is that, and it might link into what you were saying there about, you know, we have these desires and we want to manifest these amazing things in us, and they forget that we are who we are vibrationally. So if there is blocks, there's things in you that you've not healed, you can manifest all you want. You know, does that make sense? I don't know if I'm wording it properly. So you are what you vibrate. So if I've got stuff within me, abandonment issues and lack of love and self-worth and all this crap that's within me that's unhealed, and I'm going, I want to bypass all that rubbish, and yeah, I want to manifest, my doors open, Mary Poppins, I'm going to manifest all this abundance, and shit, it's not happening. Why it's not happening? Well, it's not about manifesting. You are what you are. So heal those distortions, and that will vibrate to the universe as well. So I think there's in the spiritual movement, there is that bypassing side. I think maybe seeing manifestation as a misunderstanding behind it, if that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, there's this whole thing around the law of assumption, and you just assume a new reality, which I get, I completely understand, and I'm on board with it. But the issue is that you then have resistance to that assumption. So if you don't, but because believing is seeing. So, you know, there are plenty of people out there who are incredibly wealthy, but complete assholes, right? They have terrible self-worth, you know, they have loads of issues, but they're very wealthy. Why? Because they have belief systems that align with wealth. That's all it is. But the thing is like, if you are, you know, wanting to assume, you're like, oh, I'm just going to assume a new partner, I'm just going to assume like a new, and it's like, yeah, but if you don't think you're worthy and you're good enough, you can assume a new partner. You're just going to attract a partner that's going to mirror back that you're not worthy and good enough. And I think, as you said, Stephen, there is definitely, and that's one thing that I'm very passionate about, is there's all these self-proclaimed manifesting teachers out there who are like, just assume a new reality. And I had a client who was like, you know, I was just doing all the work, and she's a perfectionist and very successful person. So I was doing all the work and I just didn't see the results. I didn't see the results. And I started to like get really anxious, and I just stopped doing it. I was like, yeah, because you didn't heal the problem. Like the problem was never, you know, your SP. The problem was the fact that, you know, you felt like you needed a partner in order to feel safe and whole and complete. And the moment we did the healing, you know, literally 2 days later, this SP that she's been waiting for her to text back for 7 months got in touch. And it's like, yeah, because we shifted the issue, we shifted the actual problem. So I think there's a lot of like just trying to paint things over of like, as you said, Mary Poppins, like, oh, it's so easy and everything. And it is easy for some people because they have a lot less resistance. But for those who have more resistance, those who have more trauma, those who have more difficulties, it's not easy. Then suddenly they feel like they're doing something wrong. They simply think they're stupid. They, you know, whatever. Oh, I'm not gifted. I'm not the chosen one or whatever. And it just buys into their belief system, and they just get stuck in the same programming.
Yeah, it's something I think something that I see a lot of, you know, watching lots of podcasts, and again, it's bypassing really the inner work. And when it comes down to it, all comes down to doing that willingness, that intention to do that inner work. And at the end of the day, I say to people, I know it sounds harsh, I said, well, enjoy your suffering then. If you're not willing to let go of the things that are making you sick, well, in a way, enjoy your suffering. And people say, you can't say, oh, no, that's really harsh. And I think sometimes people need that wake-up call to say, look, you got two paths here. You can either and some people will take themselves home to spirit. They do anything to avoid facing the trauma and the pain of their inner child, whether it's this life or past life. And it is, you know, when you watch the people you love and you care about deeply, but you've got to trust and surrender. That's a big thing. Just trust and surrender. Everything happens at that right time, and you have to have that willingness to do that inner work when it comes down to it. You know, live your life in ignorance then, you know, but it's a path. It all comes down to healing, in my opinion. It all comes down to that inner healing. And it is amazing when people are willing to do that, the transformation that happens. I mean, you must see that yourself, Andrew, you know, the amount of people that are so grateful. And I say to people, I didn't do that. You did that yourself. You found that power within you. I just created that space. Yeah, I was a guide, a support through that process, but ultimately empowering people to empower themselves is a big one at the moment as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's been a really amazing episode. Really enjoyed this chat, and sort of as we bring it to a close, I feel like we've touched on so many different areas. It's really been good, and I'd like to sort of ask a bit of a kind of wild card question in this one, which is we've talked a lot about self-worth, the self-healing side, which is really fundamental and where we need to be right now, I feel, in the conversations we're having on these platforms. But really broadening things up. Obviously, we're called the Collective Awakening here, and I always ask a lot of our guests on this podcast towards the end, what's your thoughts and feelings of what is happening in the world at the minute? How do you see the world and this very evolving time that we seem to be living in now? It's certainly not a boring time to be alive, that's for sure. But what's your views on it? How are you feeling with it at the moment, Andrew?
I think it's easy for me to give this answer because I'm a white middle class person who has, you know, lives in a very safe environment. I don't have bombs falling on my house. So it's easy for me to say, oh, everything's happening for a reason. And, you know, and I'm sure if I was in a different kind of place, maybe I would say something otherwise. But I just believe that this is like, it's just, again, comes back to the energy of acceptance. And I believe that everything is light, and this idea of, like, you know, darkness and the battle and all this kind of stuff, I think that's an illusion that man creates because we love a drama. And what if this is just, everything's just unfolding perfectly? So for me, you know, I feel like people are waking up. I think that there's constant waking up everywhere we go, you know, and what I mean by waking up is just people are realizing that what jobs they were doing doesn't bring them happiness. They're realizing that they've been living the story of, you know, their ancestors and not their own story. And I think there's definitely a massive shift that's happening. And like we see in everything, there's always polarity, and there's going to be the opposite. And sometimes we need to go backwards in order to move forwards. And so, yes, there's some really horrible things happening in the world, you know, especially if we look at the trans right movement and all of this like backward thinking around, you know, LGBTQ rights and stuff like that, which I'm very passionate about. But I don't choose to get angry about it, because if I get angry about it, I'm just adding to that energy. So it's not about putting my head in the sand. It's just trusting that everything is going to work out. And if I'm passionate enough about it, then I will take action and I will join a cause and I will do something. But I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to choose violence or hate or anything like that for any of the things that are going on in the world, because I know that the universe only listens to frequency. It doesn't listen to the reason behind the frequency in the first place. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really well put. And yeah, I've just really enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. As you said rightly, our time is really precious, one of the greatest things we can share. And if anybody is interested in Andrew's work, perhaps connecting with him one-to-one, we will put all the links, all the information, whether you are listening or watching to this. So once again, Andrew, just thank you so much for taking part in this episode, and for answering the call as well. The random message that I send now and again, just out to those, I just get the nod. Yes, this is somebody we need to speak to. So thanks for answering the call.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And it was a really beautiful conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And my laptop's about to die, so it's perfect.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone. And thank you for listening and supporting this podcast.